All right, deep breaths, everybody. We've got some fun material to cover. It's really a thrill to be back here at the Mac Admins Conference at Penn State University. I have missed so much being in the room with all of you for the last 4 years since we left each other's company last in 2019. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tom Bridge. I'm the Director of Product Management for Device Management at a little company called JumpCloud based out of Colorado. We are an IT company that is focused on device identity management. Come see us at the booth if those words did not make sense in that order, but we're always happy to talk to people about what we do at JumpCloud. I wrote this talk initially. I submitted it as Software Update the Missing Manual, and then I ran it by some very nice people who work in copyright law who briefly informed me that there was a whole series of, books called The Missing Manual, so we couldn't call it that. And so the next version of this talk was, Discovery D2, in parentheses, of course, Electric Boogaloo, because who here remembers everything about Discovery D? The way that there was laughter in the room and not sobbing tells you that Apple can fix things that are broken. In addition, there is another option of this talk, which is that software update can be a threat or a menace, and we all have to learn how to deal with all of those things. The other option here was my other favorite thing. If you've ever had a lawnmower or a chainsaw or another thing that can, do gross bodily harm to yourself and your friends, you have a guide to safe usage. I was told that this was too negative and that I should take that out. So I landed here. Software update, where we're going, where we've been. Because in order for us to understand the current moment, you have to know how we got here, and you have to know where we're headed next. Who here is responsible for updating their Macs at work? Who here likes that job right now? All right, one or two, yeah. I mean, it is better than digging ditches most days. I will say, as someone who used to dig ditches, that doing software update management is a little easier on the hands, a little fewer calluses, maybe about as much swearing, but that is certainly up to you. So I want to talk first about how macOS and iOS devices update in the year of our Beyonce 2023. And so in order to do that, I'm going to flash a couple of links up on the screen. There are QR codes. There's no shame in pulling out your phone and going, boop, QR code. I love that. I promise these are not the bad kind of QR codes that you've heard about on bleepingcomputer.com. But the first of these two is Apple's Platform Deployment Guide. Who here has read that guide front to back? A lot of us have. Who here have read at least some of that guide? Every hand goes up. The Platform Deployment Guide is a phenomenal resource that Apple has produced over the last few years, and I want to give a huge shout out to the team that builds this document. This document is amazing. If you have a question about how something works with Apple in the enterprise, go look at this guide first, ask in the MacAdmin Slack second, and if you can't find the answer in those two places, the answer is undisclosed to you at this time and will be available in the future version of the Platform Deployment Guide. In addition, I want to hand you the second partner resource to this, and that is Apple's Platform Security Guide. Apple has an intense focus on making secure platforms. And not just platforms that are secure when they ship the device to you, but that they stay that way. That the operating system updates in a secure and understandable fashion, wherein you get a good experience most of the time. And if you don't get a good experience, you definitely get a very secure experience. And I would say that understanding these two documents is at the core of understanding how Apple talks about things and understanding how Apple wants you to think about things. These two documents together are the MacAdmins forming documents. They are the place that I have bookmarked number 1 and number 2 on my Chrome bookmark bar. The APD and the PSG together represent an incredible wealth of knowledge and a masterwork of technical documentation. If you've ever met a few of the wonderful people who work on that team, please buy them a beverage when you see them next. They are doing hard work in the dark invisibly, and they are doing it to the benefit of us all. So, some very key vocabulary as we go through the rest of this talk. There is a difference between an update and an upgrade. An update is a minor release of macOS, i.e. 13.2.1 to 13.3, which was the current versions of the operating system when I started writing this deck. The extra gray hair is from Rapid Security Response. We'll talk more about that later. There is also the concept of an upgrade, to go between major versions of macOS, like macOS 12 Monterey to macOS 13 Ventura, or to go from macOS 13 Ventura to macOS 14 Sonoma when it is released later this year. That is an upgrade. Beginning with macOS 12.3, we also got what is called an over-the-air update, or an upgrade at that point. macOS 12.3, unbeknownst to us when it was released at the time, contained a new update mechanism, a new upgrade mechanism, which allows you to receive only the bits you need to go from point A to point B, and you do not need to treat an upgrade as anything other than an update, which means, who here remembers when macOS 13 shipped, and there was some consternation that, oh my gosh, I might not be able to stop this one forever. I strongly recommend in your posture at work that you not stop people from making their computers more secure, if at all humanly possible. There are good reasons why you might want to wait out your participating security vendor as they prepare for a new version of the operating system, as you might want to talk with your mobile device manager. You might want to talk to your declarative device manager to make sure that everybody's ready. That is totally expected. Do not expect to wait more than 90 days from release and expect to still be able to block macOS next. That happens next. That is the thing. If I leave you with one message today, it is prepare and be ready. In addition to the over-the-air updates, we also have the concept of the Universal Mac Assistant, or UMA. Who here has downloaded from the Appleseed site a UMA installer and wondered what UMA stood for? The answer is Universal Mac Assistant. That is the tool that is inside the Install macOS Monterey.app, or the Install macOS Ventura app. Those are Universal Mac Assistant tools. They are app-based solutions which you can continue to look for the process information and shut down. However, if your operating system update is proposed by system preferences or system settings, it is out of your control to block, except via mobile device management software delay. I'm going to say that again. It's a big change. Since we've had this conversation last, there have been many major versions of the macOS operating system. We have seen many changes to the way in which we upgrade the operating system. This is the most important one of those, which is to say, as soon as the software update is available to your end user, as long as it used to be that you could say, oh, that's okay. My end users aren't admins. They can't do anything. Apple says, want to bet? And essentially allows standard users to apply major operating system upgrades, provided that they are over-the-air updates. And so you could, if you were a customer who used a tool that allowed you to watch for specific processes, like the UMA version of the application, you could shut those processes down. You can no longer do that for over-the-air updates. That is a tool outside of your control. So I want to talk a little bit about the update process. Here we are looking at the ever so lovely system settings application, and you can see that a software update is available. This is one way to update the operating system. Your individual users can be prompted by that lovely red circle at the bottom of the screen on their system settings dock. You can't see my dock currently, but I have one, so I'm going to be doing my update later. In this particular case, you have the opportunity to update now. When you click the update now, the local user who is logged in at that time, who is a disk owner, which is a very specific concept we'll get to in a minute, they type in their credential, they hit return, and the operating system begins preparing and updating. At that point. This is the most common user-focused method of handling operating system updates today. In addition, your mobile device manager can send an update command. Usually that works. Now, today, provided you're running 13.4 or later. In this particular opportunity, and you'll notice here that this is a machine, this is an interface from Jump Cloud's MDM. I'm partial, I work there, I have to be. In this case, we have a system that's running macOS 13.0.1, build 22A400. There's a version of the operating system that's available for it. I last scanned for this update back in December of 22, you know, when I was writing this talk and before the hair had all turned gray in my beard. This system has one update available to it. And in this case, I can install 13.1, a minor, and I can give it an action and send that schedule to the command. The system will then download the update and proceed through the process as I direct it. We'll talk more about MDM update commands a little bit later in this talk. In addition, this tool, at least as of press time this afternoon, still functions, the software update command line tool. You still have the ability to say software update -L and say, give me all of the updates that are available to this machine. You can then install one. This requires an interactive session where you type in the user's disk owner credentials. So if you think you can get away with doing this remotely, no, you cannot. So, in addition, Apple does publish the man file for software update. Software update is one of the longest-lived command line binaries that is present in the operating system today. Who knows the version where we first got the software update command line item? Nobody? Does anybody want to hazard a guess? 10.2, 10.3, 10.1.2. 10.1 is when we got software update, contiguous with about February of 2002, which is wild. I didn't think it was that old. It's that old. There are multiple things that you can do with the software update command line binary. It is a great way to find out what your system thinks is going on. It is like a therapist a little bit for you. Let us understand what is happening on that device. So now that you have the update downloaded, you've told the update to install, the update is going to be, who here has been seeing an update stuck in the preparing update phase for a while and wondered, what are you preparing? Is it, are you making lasagna? Is this a 7-course fish dinner? I don't understand what is going on. I want to talk a little bit about this. Again, Apple Platform Security Guide, my favorite document and yours as of today, tells you a little bit more about what is being measured and what is understood out of an individual device. During that update process, the operating system measures part of what is currently on disk and part of what is available to it in the update. There are cryptographic measurements taken for the iBoot kernel, for the operating system image itself, and there's an anti-replay value for security purposes, in addition to the ECID, which is associated with the individual chip on that board. Not just a chip like it someplace else, that chip. This is why you need to be able to talk directly to Apple during that boot process. In addition, what the authorization server sends back to the device is a signed authorization response. That is a signature for the software that is about to be installed, so that if something were to go awry during the upgrade process and that signature no longer checks out, system goes into safe mode, you've got to reinstall the operating system directly from a new version of the operating system that is downloaded to the device at that time. In addition, you get a new anti-replay value, which prevents somebody else from trying to do the exact same thing at the same time, and you get a new ECID associated with the individual chip. Apple, in their platform security guide, says, during upgrades and updates, a connection is made to the Apple installation authorization server, which includes a list of cryptographic measurements for each part of the installation bundle to be installed. For example, iBoot, the kernel, and the operating system image. A random anti-replay value, the nonce, or number once, and the device's unique exclusive chip identification is included in that list. Those things are checked for security during the upgrade process. I also want to take a moment here to show you my second favorite Apple document called Use Apple Products on Enterprise Networks. Who here has an enterprise network? Are they fun? Not so much. So I have some important guidelines here. The QR code will take you to this article. This article, again, is number 3 on my bookmark list. Here's something I want you to take to heart. At some point in your life, you're going to have to learn to trust Apple at least a little bit. Trusting people is hard. I get that. I have those problems. We've all been hurt before. And so from that perspective, I want you to think carefully about how you talk to Apple. You have trusted Apple to assemble your device in a factory that they control 8,000 miles in all likelihood from where you are now. And in those cases, you have trusted them to go through that process securely, build a system that's going to work for you, and build an operating system that runs on that hardware. All of these things require an immense amount of trust. You need to continue on with that trust. And I need you to hear me when I say, do not inspect the TLS or SSL traffic to or from Apple for any reason. Please, save your sanity for other people you may not trust quite so well, and give that little bit of that piece back to their friends and give them the benefit of the doubt next time. So, I also want to make it clear that blocking outbound connections to Apple from network segments that are not run by security organizations that have nation-state actor access and other things along those lines, or maybe places that manage nuclear weapons, generally speaking, is a bad plan. Do not block that traffic. That traffic needs to go out to Apple so that you can come back and get more traffic from Apple that tells you how to do these things and how to go through those update processes. If you have a proxy, and that is a perfectly legitimate choice in some circumstances, skip it for the Apple traffic. There are a lot of great ways to do that. The Use Apple Products on Enterprise Network tickets is very clear on why that is a safe thing to do. The last thing I want you to take home is that once upon a time, who ran a Reposado server? I thought that was pretty cool. Reposado was pretty rad. And it was very, very helpful at making software updates painless on local networks where traffic is restricted a little bit. As a response to this, this whole method doesn't work if Apple is not supplying the bits that you're trying to install. It just doesn't work that way anymore. It is okay to send your Reposado server down the river. It is also perfectly fine for you to stand up a content caching server on any Mac on your network. There are now MDM profiles that will turn that feature on, allow you to program it so that they have multiple interfaces, allow you to handle multiple VLANs and multiple routes, allow you to have upstream and downstream servers, peers on your network to load balance. These are all great things. Apple does make it possible for you to do a lot of this and have a lot of those bits, if not all of those bits, on your network so that you don't need to plan for 35 terabytes of transfer in 24 hours after a new version of the operating system drops. Content caching servers, especially for those of you who have large fleets in one place, or labs, or any number of things, do yourself a favor, set up a content caching server. It has gotten way better, and that MDM profile is baller. There are few MDM profiles that have as much detail and thought placed into them as that one. Go take a look at that set of the developer documentation if you want to just be amazed at what they're up to. They're thinking about this stuff. I do want to take us back, because this is also where we've been. And I want to talk about the evolution of macOS software updates as they've happened over the last 10 years, give or take. So what's past is prologue. macOS 10.11, excuse me, I always do this. It was OS 10, 10.11, El Capitan, introduced the concept of rootless, or system integrity protection. Parts of the operating system were not for you anymore. And it didn't matter if you had root access on the box. There were some things you could not write unless your process was signed by an Apple certificate. Those parts of the operating system were essentially to you read-only. And that was a huge advance because that meant that someone resident on your device couldn't touch key systems like trust stores and trust evaluation systems and network connectivity in ways that could be deleterious to your business. And yes, I'm sorry, that's a $5 word, but it sounds so good. Deleterious is a great one. So if we think about that introduction, that was the beginning of this. That is the timescales that we think upon when we have to think about managing Apple devices. macOS 10, did it again. OS 10, 10.12, Sierra introduced APFS, a new file system built for booting your operating system. First, it was only available to Apple Macs running with a solid-state drive included. APFS had a number of improvements over the previous HFS Plus file system. Some of those include volume groups, snapshots, all sorts of modern filing conveniences that other operating systems had for quite some time with ZFS and with some of the other snapshot-based solutions that we've had here. macOS 10.12 was an evolution of that process. It was another 3 years before we got macOS 10.15, and now it is macOS 10.15. We have abandoned the OS 10 language at this point. Catalina creates an APFS volume group and moves the system to a read-only volume that's contained within that volume group. Though that volume within the volume group can technically be mounted as a read-write system and changed, it shouldn't be. And there were still parts of it that you could not touch because of the system integrity protection. So while this was a movement in the right direction, we weren't quite there yet. In addition, macOS 10.15 formally deprecates the concept of software catalogs, which was the basis of Reposado. And so at that point, Apple was your primary and only source for operating system updates and upgrades. So this is what that looks like. In this particular case, around 10.15, you have a volume group that represents a logical volume of Macintosh HD, which contains inside of it a system volume, which is the system folder and some other directories, and a data volume for user data and non-Apple applications at that point. Big Sur and macOS 11 locks down that system volume with a cryptographic seal. You can no longer mount this volume without the seal matching. There is no way to change the contents of that volume, period, full stop. Booting is actually now accomplished by mounting a snapshot of that APFS system volume. You are not booted off of the bits on the disk, you're booted on a version of that bits on disk at that time. Which means you could, if you were able to break the cryptographic seal, break a bunch of stuff in the system. Are you actually messing with the operating system itself? You're not! And then the next time you try to boot that operating system, it's going to fail, make you reinstall the operating system all over from scratch. So it looks like this now. We have a sealed system volume. I couldn't find a good seal, so I kind of think that's a bookmark tag. I don't know, emoji are weird. But that seemed like a good one for this particular situation. So, but we're not here just for the history lesson. We're here to talk about updates. I have to stay on topic, sorry. All right. So in this particular case, when you do that update process, the system downloads everything it needs to do to create that new version of the operating system. It is run by an Apple process that is signed by an Apple certificate. It has those cryptographic values that we talked about before. It unlocks the operating system, does the changes necessary, and then at the conclusion of that process, creates a new system volume snapshot to boot from the next time. So at that point, you have moved beyond that old version of the operating system and off you go. Oh, I'm trying to think, did my screen went black? All right, here we go. Software update isn't just about the bits on disk, though. Who here has an Intel Mac with them? Fewer than I expected. All right. I'm sorry? A few in the hotel? All right, that's cool. They don't need to be with you, but. Oh, that's very true. That's brutal. I was going to say the all-day battery life of the Apple Silicon Mac is its single greatest feature, and for one, I'm grateful because I have not charged most of the day today, and it is still in pretty good stead. So software update is also about hardware. And I want to take a moment here to celebrate macOS 12 Monterey's single best feature, erase all contents and settings. Oh my God, can we give a round of applause for Apple on this one, please? As much pain as we have suffered through, this was a delivery of manna from heaven. In a lot of ways, let's think about what the operating system does when you tell it to erase all contents and settings. So again, we have our spot here. We have our sealed system volume. We have our data volume that is contained on there with the user data and the non-Apple applications that are all hanging out in there. And in this particular case, what happens next? Well, the system just says, well, I don't need that anymore, and chucks out the non-system volume. And says, at that point, well, what do I do now? Who here remembers the blinking question mark of original macOS? Well, the system kind of goes through that process, and at the conclusion of that, just says, well, I'll just make a new one. And so it does. It tosses out the old data volume, creates a new user volume with user data, and starts Setup Assistant all over again. And off you go. 5 minutes or less. From a machine that needs to be recycled to a machine that's ready to go out to a new human being again. It's frickin' magic. I love that. So we have to talk a little bit about how macOS boots in order to understand how it's secure and how software updates operate and how we go through the gauntlet, right? This is all about trust. Intel Macs with T2 coprocessors, and I'm only talking about those with T2 coprocessors, not those that came before, or not the Apple Silicon Macs. We'll talk about those next. In this case, the T2 chip that is on that logic board boots first. And it validates the boot ROM, it validates the bootloader, it validates the kernel cache signature on file, and then it validates the primary system's UEFI environment. And then loads that EFI and starts the Intel processor. At that point, the Intel chip goes through a similar process to look at boot.efi. Is this still okay? It is two persons looking at each other, and it's a little bit like the Spider-Man graphic where they just kind of point at each other. That's a little bit about what's going on here. They are going through the process to make sure that everything is secure. And at the conclusion of that process, boot EFI then validates the macOS signature that's on disk, that's controlled by the disk controller that's included in the T2. At that point, it will conclude and boot macOS. In addition, those T2 coprocessors run BridgeOS, which I have been told is not named for me. I think that's BS. But, here we have another kind of device. This is another device that goes through a software update process, similar to the same operating system updates that we go through on our iOS devices and other places. Sometimes you may find problems with this moment. Who here has had to use Revive associated with Configurator to get things back where they belong? More hands than I'd like, but less than I expected, which is probably a good sign that either these T2 machines are aging out of our fleets or that we have, done enough damage to our brains to forget about it forever, as we should. In these cases, Apple Configurator 2 is valuable for reviving those devices and getting them back into the good graces of the device. It can also be Configurator can also be used for restoring these devices to good working order, as long as you don't care what was on them before. There are some complications to having two computers in your computer. Yo dog, I heard you like computers and I put a computer in your computer is not the most enjoyable phrase, and yet here we are. Macs with Apple Silicon go through a different process. And while I picked the M1 Pro because I like that logo the best, this also applies to anything with an M1, an M2, an M2 Pro, an M2 Pro Ultra, an M2 Max, or whatever else we can cram into that particular naming convention. On these systems, they go through that process of validating their low-level bootloader, which is that LLB that's contained in there. The boot ROM contains the signature necessary for that LLB and validates it to make sure that it is still cryptographically secure and goes through that process. It validates, the LLB in turn, once it is loaded, validates system-paired firmware signatures that are associated with the firmware on that device at that time. That also allows it to handle the local policy file. The secure enclave of the M1 or M2 or Apple Silicon processor contains that secure signed local policy. And at that point, the boot ROM fetches that local policy nonce from a secure storage component within the processor. That number once is that anti-replay value that we were talking about during the upgrade process. That value determines whether or not the system has been tampered with. At that point, we can go to iBoot stage 2. If this feels like an engineering diagram gone horribly awry and you're questioning your life choices about attending this session, please tell you that when I read this the first time, I questioned my life decisions and thought about going back to digging ditches. Because at least at the end of the day, you could put the shovel away. Anyhow, that local policy also contains information about the boot kernel collection, the auxiliary kernel collection. I have to ask an embarrassing question, and I'm taking my glasses off so I can't see who's responding. Yes. Is anyone out there still doing kernel extensions on their Apple Silicon systems? Thank you. Okay, still one or two. It's fine. Come see us at the booth. We'll talk. I just want to talk. All right. In those cases, I'm not talking about system extensions, though those system extensions also have their role as part of this. Kernel extensions have special access to the boot kernel. And at that point, you have to be very, very careful with what they're allowed to touch. And you have to operate macOS in a lower security mode in order for them to work at all. You are eschewing some of your security in favor of a vendor who did not do their homework. And as I tell my 9-year-old when he does not do his homework, no Nintendo for you. Anyway, I usually give in after about 15 minutes. All right. At the conclusion of those validation files where you get to the end of local policy being okay, now you can get to macOS. And now you have the new version of the operating system stood up. All of these checks require that information that we got from the authorization solution at the very beginning of that process. Those messages have to come back from Apple, signed by Apple, in clear and perfect concert for everything to work. When Chris Daw and I gave our talks about Wi-Fi, we talked a lot about how none of this stuff should work at all. This is an engineering marvel. This is a masterwork. This is a Nobel frickin' Prize of a secure boot process. Windows doesn't have this. I love Linux. It's third in my heart, but it also doesn't really have this. macOS's secure boot solution and secure upgrade model is amazing. It is complex, and it is just as complicated as it has to be in order for it to work. So now I want to talk about managing software versions. Initially, I called this "and other lies we tell ourselves," because at the end of the day, we have to rely upon others to help us with this process. And like any team exercise, as we may remember from high school, not everybody does the work. And sometimes you can't do the work for them. And that is both frustrating and a part of life that we get to deal with. This is a kind of uncertainty that we have to live with, and that is why reporting and reporting structures is key to handling all of this. So, I want to talk about requirements for software update. You need a mobile device manager to do anything interesting with software update. Period, full stop, do not pass go, no $200. Anybody here managing Macs at scale without an MDM? Couple? Okay. It's time. Come talk to us. There are 9 MDM vendors here this week, and there are 4 more that I think would probably be great for you on top of those 9. So come see us at the booths. We're out in the sponsor areas. We love to talk to people. It does not have to break the bank to manage Macs with MDM. You probably need more than an MDM in 2023, in July of 2023, to manage your Macs and keep them up to date. Beginning with macOS 14 Sonoma, however, declarative device management is interesting and very helpful at providing some instructions. So I want to talk a little bit about how MDMs work and how MDM updates work. This is what the process is. Your MDM is on the right side of the screen. Your MDM managed Mac or iOS device is on the left-hand side of the screen. Your MDM controls the cadence for all of this. And the first thing it has to say is, please do a scan for macOS updates. And the device will respond back, okay, that sounds like fun, I'll do that, that sounds good, why not? But then time passes. Does the device ever come back and tell you, hey, I got updates? No. You have to ask it again. Hey, you did a scan pretty recently. Tell me what updates you have. And then you'll receive back through the MDM control command channel, you'll get back an array of available updates and product keys that are associated with the individual device. Not just the updates it thinks it can install at the user's perspective, all of the updates it knows about and that Apple knows about for that device. This is a very important distinction because MDM updates that are sent out over the command are not subject to any delay commands that you have sent to the device. So if you have sent a 90-day delay for minor software update versions, that system will not see macOS 13.4 or 13.4.1. It might still be on 13.3. That system will not prompt the user to install those updates. Your MDM, however, can know about them from the device's perspective and say, do the thing, and then install 13.4.1. At the conclusion of that process, you've got an array of available updates that are available to the device at the time. Your MDM says, okay, I would like you to go get this update and then install it like this. We'll talk about the commands what happens. At the conclusion of that process, the device says, yeah, okay, whatever. And it's all, again, once a little bit like my 9-year-old, and I ask him to go clean his room, and he goes upstairs, and he maybe reads a book. And the clothes are still on the floor, and the Legos are still on the floor, and you step on the Lego in the hallway and say words you regret. And then you ask him, well, I asked you to clean your room. How was the book, though, right? We turn into a bonding moment, it's cool. There are things that can happen on a device that will cause it to attempt to download the update and fail. There will be things that happen on the device that have no explanation that will cause it to not update in the way in which you think. Your users can be prompted to install an update, and the users can say, well, that was cool, but no. I have stuff going on, so no. And that is also a possibility. I also want to take a moment to talk a little bit about how iOS is pretty much the same as everything that we just talked about here for macOS, but there are some different postures that you need to be aware of when it comes to MDM commands. Any MDM enrolled Mac can be told to install an update via the MDM control channel. Any MDM enrolled Mac, provided it's device enrolled or automated device enrolled. If you're using user enrollment for macOS, come see me because you're a unicorn. But I want to talk to you anyway because I think that's a really interesting posture. However, user-enrolled systems cannot be told to install updates. So if we think about it this way, on iOS, if you're going through that user enrollment, where it's either account-driven user enrollment or profile-driven user enrollment, those systems cannot be told to upgrade their operating system. Now here was the one that surprised me. Manually enrolled iOS devices that have most of the full panoply of iOS management commands available to them will also not accept a software update command. You have to be supervised in order for the device to accept an upgrade command from the device. That's changing with declarative management. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So when we think about those commands, you remember I said we have to do things in a certain way. There are different behaviors that are available to the MDM manufacturer in terms of, hey, what are the commands that I can send down to this device? And there's a difference between major upgrades and minor updates in terms of which postures are supported. The default action is supported for both of those things, and it is, please download this update, tell the user that you're downloading this update. On completion of downloading this update, prepare this update, and then do nothing. It's that last part that drives me a little bit nuts. Couldn't we just like push them off the cliff and get them to update? Please, pretty please? Okay, we can't. There is also the command to download the update first. And you can tell your devices to download whatever update you're telling it to download. Those bits will come down to the disk, but that is all that will happen. The user isn't notified that anything is happening. They are not prompted to install anything. The red little circle on their system settings app doesn't turn on. It's just, go get the bits. Install ASAP is the third, and I don't know, it's not my favorite, but it's close. Install ASAP is download those bits, prepare that operating system, tell the user you're doing it, and at the conclusion of this process, tell the user they have 60 seconds to save their work. But, like me telling Charlie, no Nintendo, it is an empty threat. If they have an application open that is blocking them and that would cause data loss if the application were quit at that point, nothing happens. The upgrade is not applied in that moment. This install ASAP is, okay, it will surprise none of you to know that I liked doing my homework and that I was pretty good at it and that going to school was a whole lot of fun. Not everybody has that experience. I'm the person that install ASAP is made for, because it's like gives me a ticky list, an action to do on my to-do list. And then I do it, and I get that little dopamine hit, and I go and get a water, or I go walk around the block, and my system reboots, and everything is fine. I love those kind of things. I'm a weirdo, you guys. Not everyone is like this. In fact, my favorite software update story goes back to my colleague at Merriweather Post Pavilion who ran the box office. Running a box office at a 40,000 person venue is an insanely stressful job because everyone wants to know who you are, and then once they figure out who you are, they want to know if you can get them tickets to go see Dave Matthews Band, or the country show that's in town, or the latest top 40 act, and do you really know anybody who knows Taylor Swift? She would never restart her computer. In the 10.15.7 era, she had clicked not now on the upgrade from 10.12.4 for over 1,000 days in a row. We finally politely distracted her, took her computer, upgraded it, and returned it. I don't think I've gotten concert tickets since then. But it was worth it. After install ASAP is notify only. It does what it says on the tin. Of all of the choices that you could make with MDM commands, may I suggest you make another. Lastly, install later. Install later is my favorite when it works and not when it doesn't. Install later is sneaky. Install later takes advantage of your user's laziness and their credulity and does it in such a way that you get pretty good compliance off of install later when it works. Install later is only available for minor updates of macOS. You cannot install a major upgrade of macOS with install later, which makes me sad. This is one of the things we'll get to when it comes time to talking about feedback, because this is the one I want fixed. I don't think it's ever going to be fixed, but that's okay. I can live. Install later uses the bootstrap token, which we have not talked about yet, but that we will get to on this front. Install later also, as of macOS 12, supports the concept of a number of deferrals, which you are supposed to be able to specify and say the user can delay this upgrade a certain number of times before the upgrade is completely installed at the conclusion of that. Remember what I said about some things being lies? Or at least inaccurate, or unfortunate, or good intentions but not actual reality? Max deferrals is one of those things. Last but not least is my actual favorite for install, which is, at JumpCloud, we call it the hammer. This is the hammer. Admins need a hammer at the end of the day. There are some users who love you deeply, but vex you. Install force restart is your solution for them. Install force restart downloads the update, prepares it, gives them 60 seconds, and then flips them the bird and then restarts their computer. Install force restart is a last resort. There are other ways to have better experiences with your customers inside your organization than install force restart. I strongly recommend printing out 3 envelopes before you run install force restart on anybody who makes more than $50K a year. And the first envelope will say, reorganize IT. And the second envelope inside it will say, make a new plan. And the third envelope will say, print 3 envelopes, because that's the 3 envelopes you're going to hand to the next person who does your job, or that you're going to leave in your desk. Install force restart. I love its ethos, but it is not great user experience. They do get a 60-second warning. May I recommend using install ASAP several times before, and documenting it, and putting timestamps in your log, and sending those things to your security officer, and then, and only on their approval, sending install force restart. It is there for you, but it is not for you. It is for your CISO. All right, deferrals. Introduced in macOS 12, deferrals are meant to help admins deploy software updates without direct user involvement. You can set a maximum number of deferrals. When the user is prompted, and they will not be prompted more than once about every 20 hours, and they will not be prompted when the machine is asleep, they'll be prompted after. The system decides when to display the alert. Okay. If you are very interested in control of your user messaging, this is not for you. Apple has decided they control the scheduling here. They also control when install later actually happens, and it's based on user behavior associated with the system. So that if you have shift workers who are working 3rd shift and are working overnight, guess what? They're not going to get an update forced on them between 1 and 5 a.m. Their system's not going to do that until 3 in the afternoon when they've gone home. And that's when they go through that process. So there are some really smart things that Apple has done about user behavior on device with the neural engine that is what drives these choices. But generally speaking, it is traditionally between 1 and 5 a.m., but is influenced by their activity. And it generally requires power to be connected or a fullish battery, 50% plus. So how does install later actually know what to do? Because if you've ever pushed an install later command, they don't come back to a totally locked up system that's shut itself down. They come back to a system that has been booted, which means the system volume has been decrypted, and everything is fine again, or unlocked, not decrypted. Apologies. The bootstrap token, the lovely, lowly bootstrap token. So a bootstrap token is gathered by your MDM via a command. You ask the device, hey, can I get your bootstrap token? And the MDM holds onto it for you. This key, which is really just a base 64 blob, is useful and is listed as a unlocker on your system volume. Now, you'll notice it's only unlocking the system volume. It's not unlocking the user data volume or any of the other volumes that are associated with the system that are encrypted this way. It is just there to unlock the system, make changes to the system, and proceed from there. The bootstrap token is what allows you to do install later from an MDM. That's what allows those updates to happen. It's why your users don't get prompted for their disk owner password when you send install later. That's what's being used in those moments. That's what the bootstrap token's really good for. And again, that bootstrap token only has access to the system volume. It does not have access to the user's data in any way, shape, or form. All right. We get to the point where the gray hair hit the beard, and that is rapid security response, which we got last year with macOS Ventura. So I want to talk what is a rapid security response update. It was first added to macOS with macOS 13 Ventura. The first of those updates came 9 months later in May of this year. User updates, or these updates are styled with a open paren, a letter, and a close paren at the end of the user volume name. They didn't just add another digit to the semantic versioning. It's not 13.4.1.1. or 0.1.2 or 0.1.3. It is 13.3.1a. Rapid security responses can be removed by the end user. Not by you, unless you're the end user of a machine. Not by your MDM, not by command. They have to be removed by the user. However, install of those updates and removal of those updates, the ability to do those things, is controlled by the admin with an MDM profile. There are keys in the restrictions payload which will allow you to allow rapid security response or not, or allow rapid security response removal or not. May I suggest that unless you have a compelling reason, allow them to be installed, maybe don't allow them to be taken away. That's the most secure posture that you have as an admin. As was recently demonstrated by current events with macOS 13.4.1a, there are some times where functionality is impeded by the update process. Those are times when you may want to change your mind. Guess what? You have access to the MDM. Change your mind in those moments. It is okay to change your mind. Document, communicate clearly all of your choices in those moments. But for the most part, allow your users to install these updates. They're security updates. We all like security updates, right? When they work. But we all like secure operating systems, and we like to keep our systems patched if we possibly can. And of course, a small technical note, JumpCloud does support managing rapid security response updates with the profile, and we will also install them via our MDM software update commands. So for the people who, shall we say, vex you, you can, or your users who have the most to lose for your organization, you're free to push those out via mobile device management command. So what is a rapid security response update? These are updates that contain special data for Safari and WebKit or other applications on iOS or macOS. That's really what they're there for. They do not function at the kernel level of the operating system. These are not things for deep frameworks. They are not things for deep application usage. They are not covering anything that would be really deeply effective inside your space. Primarily, they're for patching WebKit. Right? Because that's a really important thing that we need to be able to patch on the regular. Unlike minor updates, rapid security response updates are very, very fast to install, which means install of this update might be 3 minutes, not 20, 3. And they're based on the cryptographic extensions of the file system, so that Safari and WebKit are stored in a cryptex, which you can actually go and look at inside your /system volume and take a look at there. You'll see that the operating system is actually, 4 or 5, kids in a trench coat, by which I mean disk images that are mounted as part of the operating system. Cryptexes, cryptographic extensions of the file system, are what contain these objects. You are downloading a very small cryptex, which is then patched into the version of the operating system. Restart gets you to the conclusion. So this is what it looks like in your MDM. Here you can see 13.3.1. You can see that on the 3rd of April at 8:20 a.m., my system did a scan for the operating system updates and saw macOS Security Response A for 13.3.1 minor. with a new build ID of 22E77, oh my God, that's a lot of numbers, 22E772610A gets you to the version, the build ID of that system. That's not a lot of letters. It's gotten really complicated to manage this stuff, but this is what it looks like. So this is JumpCloud's policy. This is how I recommend you consider these kind of things. You should, at that point, consider to, go through those processes. So what I want you to come away from this with is a way to think about rapid security responses. These ephemeral updates are for patching the worst flaws. They are always high profile. They're always high security. So please patch. When you think of an RSIR update, however, I need you to think about it with a couple of lenses. They're of limited utility. They do not patch kernel space. They only patch a few system upgrades, or operating system updates and applications. This is not a widespread update as a result of that. They also have an incredibly limited lifespan, which means it is unlikely that you're going to see a lot of them because they are not around for long. As soon as Apple releases macOS 13.5, which I would expect, put it on your calendar for Tuesday next week. I can't say that because I don't know. I can just read the tea leaves. We're a release candidate for 13.5, so I would expect this to be out next week. Unless we get release candidate 2, because who doesn't love a sequel? There you go, exactly. So these updates will stop being available as soon as the next version ships. 13.4.1c is the current rapid security response. It will stop being offered to macOS 13.4.1 systems as soon as 13.5 drops. These are not updates that you have to live with for long. In addition, these kinds of updates receive limited testing. They do not go through the same QA process at Apple as major operating system updates go through. We can tell this a little bit because of the last 10 days. And I do want to talk a little bit about the information that Apple has now made public with regards to macOS 13.4.1a. Processing web content may lead to arbitrary code execution. Arbitrary code execution is like words that just make your CISO's hair stand up in the back of their neck. And usually they're reaching for the whiskey bottle without knowing why, because somewhere a 0 day has happened to them. And that's the kind of thing that we are going for. This issue was addressed with improved checks. I love the detail that we get in here. I love the fact that we now get detail. macOS 13.3.1 Release A had no detail associated with it until macOS 13.4 dropped. Apple has changed that posture. Maybe they always intended it, but not for the previous release. And so here you can see there are now technical info articles about the security content of rapid security responses for macOS Ventura 13.4.1. Here you can read the content for 13.4.1c. I would have given you B. B never happened. Let's just leave it at that. B never happened. Rapid security response macOS Ventura 13.4.1c includes the security content of rapid security response macOS 13.4.1a and fixes an issue that prevents some websites from displaying properly. They changed the user agent in 13.4.1a. That caused some security tools to be like, whoa, dude, what is going on? I'm being hacked. No, I'm not. And then they changed it back. That's all these choices were at those points. So I want to leave you, as we get down to 15 minutes to go, because I do want to leave time for questions, with a wish list for software update commands. And this was my wish list initially. Deadlines for install-based Apple release dates, closing some of the deferral escape paths, update alerts triggered by MDM should be customizable in time and persistence. Install later should apply to major upgrades. And Apple should take over the job of super or nudge. In addition, Apple should also spot problems that might result in recovery mode during a pre-flight of the update and act accordingly. So this was the wish list in early June. macOS, or Worldwide Developers Conference 2023 happened. And so the list changed a little bit, because what changed in Software Update with the Apple session at Worldwide Developer Conference? Apple says, Software Update takes advantage of declarative device management and now allows IT administrators to enforce software updates to specific deadlines with improved user transparency. They fixed it, right? We hope? So let's talk about that for a second, and I have data. I want to talk about how declarative management enforcement works. So again, we have our triad here. We have a DDM capable of MDM server, we have a devices set in the middle, and we have Apple on the right. In these cases, the DDM service sends a configuration down to the device. So what's in that configuration? What do we care about in this particular case? This is what it looks like. And it's really nice not to stare at JSON now and not at XML. I don't know about y'all, but XML always makes my eyeballs bleed, whereas JSON kind of, it just feels like a hug in comparison. You get to set a specific type of declaration here, and this is a configuration software update enforcement specific action. Here I have a payload identifier of tom.ios.enforcement, because this is an iOS payload. I'm allowed to set a details URL, which of course I set to Astrud Gilberto's reporting of the girl from Ipanema, and also a target date and time local to the device for the record. If you set it for 6 p.m., that's not 6 p.m. everywhere, not 6 p.m. where you are, it is 6 p.m. where the device is on that given date. In addition, I have specified a target OS version of 17.0 and a target build version, which is an optional key, which allows me to say 21A 5268H, which happens to correspond to beta 3. When you send that command down to the device and it receives that piece, this is an iPad that got that option. And you can see automatic download in process. The iPad is downloading the software update that I have specified as the admin right now. It gives you the option, if you go into the system at that point, to say install once downloaded. And it will prepare the update and install the update, and off you go to the races. But at the very bottom, you can see that this is a managed update. Your organization has decided to update your device to iPadOS 17.0. You can choose to update now, or it will update automatically on 6/30/23 at 6 p.m. local. So if we look at this section at the bottom is all of the configuration that we have specified in the declarative model at that point. It gives you the required version information, the deadline for the update, and the details URL, which when you tap that little I button, opens the YouTube video and plays a very nice song. All right. So here we have a version of this for macOS, and again, we're setting that same deadline of 2023, 6:30 at 6 p.m. This time I'm updating to 23.5276G because I wanted to go to the first version of beta 3. I don't know why there's two versions of beta 3. I don't make the rules, but they just don't seem to matter sometimes. Anyhow, I'm also setting a different URL, which is the talking heads. Thank you, Lucas. And this is what the system will see at that point. It will see, hey, you have a managed update for macOS Sonoma 14 beta 2. And your system will be updated on 6/30/23 at 6 p.m. So we get our required version info, we get our deadline, but what about that more info URL? Oh, that's where the detail URL goes. And so when you click more information, it pops down and it'll tell you the organizational help URL, which you can click and watch a pretty song. Anyhow. I recommend setting that not to a YouTube video. Please don't rickroll your users. Some HR departments don't take kindly to that. Well, we've all got ideas. So in this particular case, the device goes and talks to Apple and says, update please. And at the conclusion of that process, the user is once again in command. So what happens when you ignore the alerts? I'm so glad you asked. This is what happens. The default behavior starts 72 hours ahead. And in those particular spots, we get daily alerts ignoring do not disturb starting at 72 hours prior. You get 3 of those. So at 24 hours ahead of the day, you get your last daily alert, which again ignores do not disturb and allows you to continue. The next alerts are hourly. Again, ignoring DND at 24 hours prior. So they have ignored 3 alerts in the 3 days prior. Now they're going to ignore 24 of them. Or I'm sorry, 27 of them by the time we're all done. Because during the last hour, they will get an update alert at 30 minutes, 20 minutes, and 10 minutes to go. So what happens when you ignore the deadline? Little bit. You get an alert that says an update to macOS 14 is past due. You can install it now or it will be installed automatically within the next hour. That use case at the top is what happens if a Mac has been in your drawer. And you pull it out of the drawer and it's like running, I don't know, a really older version of let's say it's 14.3 is current. If it's running 14.0.1, it pulls this out, it looks at it, it says, oh, you got an update that's past due. Your MDM says update right now. You get an hour. System's gonna let you do some stuff for an hour, but at the conclusion of that process, you're gonna get that alert at the bottom that says restarting your computer. Your computer needs to restart to install updates. And it's gonna tell you that that update is set for the future. On iOS, you get a non-dismissible overlay button that says install now. I couldn't make this do anything else. I powered it down, it came right back. I tried a lot of things, but iOS and iPadOS are very strict on what they do next. So the other important piece of this, iOS and iPadOS used to be limited to supervised devices to send upgrade commands. That is not true in declarative. Any fully device-managed iOS device, that means you enrolled it with an MDM profile, it didn't have to go through ADE, knock wood, that's an awesome thing, did not have to be set up by configurator and configured by configurator, they can be forced to update this way too. This is an incredibly welcome change. Being able to enforce these kind of updates without having to rely upon supervision means that you have to supervise fewer devices to get the same result. That is a net win for privacy of your users and the security of your organization writ large. So again, what if my user was on vacation? What happens then? That's the hour delay. You get that first dialog box and then you proceed through the process. So a few other details for using software deadlines. You must be using a declarative device management capable management solution for these deadlines to be set and respected. Really important that that's the case. You must have a bootstrap token escrowed for the device. Otherwise, and we tested this as well, when you don't have the bootstrap token escrowed with the MDM, what's it like when your kid really wants you to unlock the switch and they're just like, Dad, 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 switch time? Can we play some Mario Kart, please? Dad, Dad. That's what the operating system is like at that point. It is relentless. It does not care for you. It will just come for you and show you the alert that says, you have a new version of the operating system update. Did you know about the new version of the operating system? Have you heard the good news of the new operating system? Because we're going to install it together. That's what happens. It gets very aggressive. Multiple versions of the operating system can be pushed out in the same declaration with different deadlines. There is no reason that you could not adopt a posture of 14.1 by November 1st, 14.2 by December 31st, and things along those lines. However, you should police that. The operating system's not going to like going through a lot of those checks all of the time. That may be deleterious to performance. This is also not fully documented yet, and I look forward to more information about configuring multiple versions of operating systems in this spot. My understanding is that a very large number, perhaps in the upper 3 digits, is supported. So, going back to my wish list, that's a pretty good birthday right there, right? Apple made some major changes at Worldwide Developers Conference that are built into macOS Sonoma, which is out this fall. We are still not able to customize in time and persistence the updates that we have available for our users. If you want to communicate to your users what version of the operating system is expected, that is still on you. That's okay. We all have the power of our words. We can use our words, tell our users what they should expect and how they should expect it to happen, and that's a good thing. Letting your users understand, and really what I should say is not your users, but your coworkers, because they are all your coworkers. These are all people you work with every day. Not all days, but many days. Let's think of them with kindness, please. I'd still like install later to apply to major updates, and I would still like it if they had better error handling for updates that are happening in recovery mode. So I have just given you a preview of the future, and I have to tell you to wait many months for it to exist. For that, I apologize, but I am here also to offer you coping mechanisms. And I'm also here to tell you that the Mac admins community is here to help. And I want to talk about two tools, the first of which is Nudge. QR code goes to this very excellent open source project developed by Eric Gomez and colleagues at Uber. You can go to the URL there. It takes you to their GitHub page. It's a great way to go through these processes and prompt your users to do the right thing. Because you want your users to do the right thing. You just got to tell them how. They want to help you. 98.5% of your users want to do the right thing. The other 1.5% is why you have an HR department and why you document everything. Anyhow, Nudge consists of a launch daemon in an application and a configuration in an MDM or a JSON object. It drives the user to apply their own updates. It prompts them and tells them what they should do with their lives. It gives them ever so gentle reminders. And then maybe it gives them not so gentle reminders. And then at the conclusion of that process, maybe they can't do anything else with their computer. And boy, isn't that sad. They should just do what you asked. And if they did what you asked, everything would go back to being like it was. Because it's a nice computer that they have there. It'd be good if they could use it. Anyhow, it allows you to take over the screen. It can be customized easily with messaging of your choice, which is super valuable. Letting your users know what to expect, allowing yourself to be branded in those spaces, to carry your company logo, to carry information about what's about to happen, to give them a permission to take a 60-minute walk around the block or bike ride or lunch break so that they can do their update. These are all options you have as admins with Nudge. We use this at JumpCloud as part of our patch management product. And you can customize your alerts in that fashion, including your company logo. It also has amazing community support in the Nudge channel on the Mac Admin Slack. I also want to talk about Super, again, another product that's out there, built by the community. Kevin S. White is an excellent developer and has spent a lot of time working on this because what it does is it combines a couple different solutions, which is to say your MDM and their API and IBM Notifier to prompt the user to do an access. So you do require an API token for this to work. Other MDMs may be supported in the future. My understanding is that there are a couple of others that he's working with already. And it does use the MDM command functionality to force the here. And so it uses the API commands on the device to send the request to Jamf Pro to complete that process. What happened? Why did I lose my, all right, there we go. There is another way of coping method here, and I'm talking about the software update CLI. It's very important that you read this next slide. Please take out your cameras to take a picture of it. Don't do this, please. There are other better tools for doing this kind of stuff. If you are using the CLI tool, there are other better ways to do this. If you need help finding those things, the Mac Admin Slack is here for you. The Mac Admins community is here from you. Any number of the vendors who are out there on the spot can talk with you more about this stuff. But if you have to use the CLI, there is a good command that you need to know. Sudo launchctl kickstart-k system/com.apple.softwareupdate-d. Here's where my advice gets complicated. In the macOS 13 lifespan, there were beta notes for an earlier version of the operating system that said, it is not a good idea to programmatically kick this service. Do not set up a launch daemon to do it on the regular unless you know what you are doing and you have a specific outcome in mind. So I just want you to understand that. That's very, very important. It's also important to recognize that authenticated restarts, which are required in macOS for software update, require a volume owner's password. So you need a volume owner, which is to say someone who can unlock the disk to boot the operating system, Somebody who has physically logged into the machine at least once in order to go through that update process. Last thing I want to leave you with is a couple thoughts about feedback, because the reason that we got half our wish list at Worldwide Developers Conference this last year was because enough people submitted enough good feedback for what they actually wanted and why. So if we think about feedback as an art, I have 6 rules for great feedback. The first of those is start from what you expected to happen, because what you expected to happen didn't happen. And you have to set the understanding that you are working from a perspective of, I sent install later to a device, I expected it to, install later. Not like later on a geologic time frame, but like later like tomorrow or the next day. In addition, you need to explain what happened instead and what you observed from the device. You need to describe the time and effort savings that you would happen if you got what you expected instead of what actually happened. Because saving time and effort is catnip to product managers, for one. We like it when we save people time and effort. It's more efficient, people like our products better, and we can make more cool stuff. You should provide examples and code where possible in terms of what you actually had happen. Get those sysdiagnoses. Do not submit a feedback without a sysdiagnose. Please, pretty please, get those sysdiagnoses and submit them. When the operating system increments again and you have the exact same problem, new ticket, new sysdiagnose. Keep going. Be relentless. The other thing that you need to do is center yourself with context. You need to provide the context to Apple to understand why you chose that behavior that didn't work right, what you expected to have happen, and why you expected, oh crap, I'm out of time. But I'm going to talk really fast. The last thing that's really important is clarity is the true soul of wit in this regard. In addition, I have some existing suggested topic areas for you to review. And those are MDM commands not being reliable. MDM command escapes remain too easy. Install later doesn't work with majors. Install later with deferrals are too unpredictable. Now, I want you to all look under your seat, because 2 lucky people are walking out of here with some AirTags, or they're going to come see us at the booth for the AirTags. I can't remember with. If you have a Jump Cloud keychain underneath your seat, it would be underneath your seat or underneath the desk in front of you. Taped under the seat. I know there's 2 of them. Everybody does not get a card. Has anybody found anything yet? Look under your seat.
Does the Herman Miller sticker count?
No.